So I've had the PXW-Z90 for a couple of weeks now, and I wanted to talk to you about my first impressions of the camera. I'm not a sort of professional shooter, you know, I'm not going to be using this in a kind of news environment or anything like that. But, you know, I've owned quite a few cameras, and therefore I wanted to give you my thoughts on what I personally like about it and what I don't like about it. I've chosen 11 of each, and I'll try and get through them as quickly as I can, so let's get started. Firstly, overall, the image quality is fantastic on this camera. You know, it comes up with the goods. It is, I have no complaints about the color behind it, the skin tone accuracy. The images you can get out of the camera are excellent. And, you know, that's obviously subjective and up to the individual, but overall, no complaints in that department. Secondly, picture profiles. You've got full picture profile control on this camera. So if you do want to tweak your color, if you do want to change your color matrices, whatever, you can do that, and you can really come up with the type of look that you want on this camera. So you've got full control there over many, many things within the picture profiles. It's tiny. It's brilliant because it's extremely compact, and while that might not be good for everybody, for me, it's so handy, and is in fact one of the main reasons that I'm moving back to a camera of this type, is purely because it's small. I can carry it in a rucksack easily, and you know, you can just grab it out and shoot straight away, and that is very, very important. And the package is great. It has a lot of features within a small camcorder. The XAVC-L codec, which it records to, so at 10-bit 422 in HD and 8-bit 420 in 4K, is great. It's full broadcast spec, and you know, you're not going to have any problems with submitting footage from this camera for broadcast. And the codec is, I've always loved the XAVC codecs. They're so robust, and they just come out with great image quality. You don't seem to get the same artifacts, kind of macro blocking and stuff, and other sort of compression and odd color bits, you know, the weird color bits that you can sometimes get with a poor MP4 H.264 compression. The viewfinder on the camera is brilliant. The screen, not so much. I'm talking about specifically about the viewfinder, you know, so the eye cup. Really nice OLED display, very bright, very clear. Best viewfinder that I've personally used. The internal mics, they're obviously not superb, because no internal mics on a camera are, you know, compared to a Shogun like I'm recording this on now. But they are good, and they're not sort of trying to do any directional Dolby 5.1 or anything like that. They're just a stereo mic on the camera, which will record equally from behind. So if the person's shooting, or from the front, it's just a good overall mic, a nice clear sound in PCM stereo. So I like that. Autofocus, big feature of the camera, big promoted feature of the camera, and it is great. You've got sort of fantastic face detection. You've got great the other, you know, so you've got the contrast-based autofocus and the other type as well, where you've got the dots dancing around the screen. You've probably seen footage, and it really hits the mark so much of the time. Autofocus is a big plus for this camera, and it's something that even your kind of big, oh, I only ever use manual focus, which I don't. I'm happy to use autofocus when it helps me. I think people like that will be swayed over, because autofocus is just so powerful on this camera. It's a big plus. I mentioned the picture profiles. The joystick. I like a joystick. I'm not a fan of touch screen, doing everything on the screen. I don't like to touch the screen at all, because I don't like to get finger marks on it. You do have to touch the screen for a few things. So if you're playing back clips, that's all done through the touchscreen. But most of it is done through the joystick control on the back. Some people have commented that the joystick control is a little bit out of the way. I don't find that at all. My thumb can move either way from the record button and the joystick. There's no confusion. The joystick is kind of dotted. It feels very clearly like a joystick. You're not going to confuse the two, and I find that to be wonderful to use. I had a joystick on the XF100 camera that I used to own, and I'm really pleased to have a joystick back again to be able to get through the menus. Of course, S-Log 2 and 3. This camera will shoot in S-Log 2 and 3. I haven't bought this camera to shoot in log, but I will do some testing on it, and I have already tried stuff in both 10-bit and 8-bit, and the results particularly, well, of course they're going to be better in 10-bit, but really 8-bit results have been pretty good. I've tried to pull a sort of fairly kind of harsh grade from the S-Log footage back to back to rec and back to some kind of more kind of film type look footage, and the results are brilliant. For 8-bit footage, it's by far the best footage I've worked with. For 8-bit footage, I've used other cameras where log footage, log footage recorded in camera, so 8-bit in camera, has just not been usable. It is on this camera from what I've seen so far, and I will do a video in the future where I show you some of that footage, give you samples to download or something like that, so you can have a go at grading it yourself and see what you think. The manual controls available on this camera are great. It is a small body, so yes, there is a certain amount of fiddliness in getting around them because it's small. You simply can't spread things out when something's tiny. So you get used to that, and it gives you a lot of control. It gives you all the controls that you need, and I haven't found anything to be terribly cumbersome around moving, to the right controls at the right time. The camera is super fast to start up. You open it, and if you've got the lens cap off, yes, lens cap, I'll come back to that in a second, it is incredibly fast, like 2 seconds I think you can be recording in. It's just brilliant as far as speed to start up. And for some people, that will be incredibly important. Doesn't bother me so much, but for some people who are out there where getting a piece of news relies on, whether you get the main event can be the difference between a 5-second startup and a 2-second startup. That's really important. So they're the main kind of good points that I can think of on the camera. So overall, it's a great camera, great package for the money. But let's look at some of those bad points, because these are the points where companies, they're never going to promote these to you. They're never going to say, for example, my first one here is the fact that this camera has a lens cap. Who uses a lens cap? Who wants a lens cap on a camera anymore? You simply just want something on the hood, on the front, to protect the lens. You don't want to be having something that physically comes off and can be lost. But that's what this camera has. Not very 2018, if you ask me, but it does. So they're never going to advertise that, are they? They're never going to put in there comes with great lens cap. They can be removed and put in your pocket. Why would they say that? So these are the points where the little niggles where people kind of want to know about these before they invest in a camera, because you can decide whether or not these are things that are going to bother you. If the lens cap doesn't bother you, fine. Then you can check that one off and say, this camera's still for me. Remember, going into this is a 4K 30p or 25p in PAL as I am camera. It isn't a 4K 60p camera. People will moan about that and say this camera should have been. It isn't, okay? So just move on from that, get over it, and just kind of, if it's not right for you, fine, then you obviously need to go for a different type of camera. It's 4K 30p. Just want to rule that one out. I don't really see that as a bad point, because that's what this camera is. It's not a failure as such. It's just, that's what it is, okay? So that's kind of my view on that one. Manual focus, I don't want to dwell on this. There is a manual focus issue if you're pulling a kind of a focus sort of across, say, a meter or something between an object in the front and an object in the back. If you do that slowly, it currently is working in very static steps of focus. I've done a video completely separate on this because I've raised this issue with Sony and they're supposed to be looking at it. I haven't heard back from them yet, but we'll see what they say. So watch that video if you want to and find out more about the problem. But the manual focus side of things, I'm not impressed with it at the moment, and this could be a deal breaker for me in that there are times I do want to use shots like that, and they're just not going to look good on this camera at all. Limited audio options. Well, that's what I wrote on my sheet anyway, and what I mean by that is the XLR side of things on this camera is the handler attaches, so it is a separate sort of part. It's apart from the camera, and what that means is that you can't use the group of controls on the side. You got your volume controls, your phantom power, the low cuts, all that type of thing on the side of the camera. You can't use that. It can only be used with the XLR, so you can't use that with the internal mics. What I like to do is be able to have one channel XLR and then one channel of the internal mic. Just, if that's what the setup is, it probably sometimes would be the other XLR would be the lav mic, but If it's not, I like to capture the internal mic as well. And you can't do that because if you're using the handle as your audio source, then you can't use the internal mic at all. And speaking of the internal mic, the level controls on it are terrible. You can only adjust the level controls in a kind of little adjustment with the joystick, which sounds okay. So it's all software based, but you can't see the levels while you're doing it. That seems completely stupid to me. You know, on most cameras, you could adjust the audio levels and watch as the levels are moving and just kind of go, yeah, test, test, oh no, test. You have to go out of the menu, look at the levels, test it, go back into the menu and make... Crazy. Please, Sony, if you ever see this video, please fix that in firmware because that's daft. I mean, there must be a better way of doing that if you want to, you know, people will want to use probably the internal mic sometimes on this camera, particularly in the kind of super compactor mode. The slowest zoom on this camera is not slow enough for what I would like. I like to set my rocker on the handle to be set to the slowest zoom, and you can adjust the speed of the zoom. And I've set that to 1, and it's still a very noticeable jarring start to the zoom. So you cannot ramp it in very slowly, even with the rocker on the side of the camera. You can't ramp it in slowly. And what I like to do is have that zoom so that I can change the composition almost without people knowing. You know, just the zoom is so gentle that people would hardly notice that the image has actually zoomed out a bit. That's how I like it to be, and you can't do it on this camera. It's just too jarring. It uses a histogram. Please, it's a video camera. Please, can you use a waveform monitor and a vector scope? That's what my brain understands. That's what I am used to using. And whenever I'm editing and grading, I'll be using that all the time. So I can look at it and immediately see what's going on. I don't even have to think about a waveform anymore. You know, you get so used to it. But a histogram for video is just not something I'm used to. Maybe it's standard for Sony stuff. I don't know. But I think it's crazy. Stabilization is not quite as good as I would have liked. It's certainly not up to the XF405 from the videos I've seen and the tests that other people have done for kind of walking with somebody. The XF405 seems to produce much better results and seems to have better active stabilization. It's okay, but it isn't as good as I'd hoped. It's certainly not as good as the consumer AX53 camera, which I have, which has that sort of gimbal, the Boss stabilization on. And I wouldn't expect it to be because that's a sort of different solution altogether. But it doesn't, from what I've seen, compare to the XF400 and 405, which this camera sits very much along in the kind of market segment. The Hdmi Out is only 8-bit. I'm pretty sure of that. I have heard that and I've read it, but if anyone wants to prove me wrong on that and correct me on that, then please do so. Even at HD, when the camera is 10-bit internal HD, the output over HDMI will still be 8-bit. Seems a bit crazy. Not a big deal for me because I use SDI, but it would be nice to, you know, for the new 5, you know, recorder from Atomos, that really nice small kind of smartphone size type recorder. That'd be nice to use with this camera if you wanted to. But to be honest, the codec internally is so good anyway that you don't really need it. Battery life is a little bit worse than I had expected. Those batteries do start to plummet down quite quickly. I think the battery that's provided with it is a little bit under spec for the power demands of the camera. That's a shame. You can get a bigger battery, but it does kind of get in the way of the viewfinder a bit. They actually even say that in the manual. They even say, you know, that if you do buy this, the 100 battery versus the 70, it will kind of get in the way of the bottom of the viewfinder, the eye cup. You can't do anything about that, but it does eat the batteries, so you will need to have a few available. The batteries are really, really small, really nice and portable, so it's just a kind of trade-off, isn't it? That's what all these cameras are about. It's all about trade-off and compromises. You know, it's really small camera, of course, it's going to be lightweight, smaller battery. Well, you're not going to have the power on board then, are you? So, yeah. But it does run down a little bit quicker than I thought it would. The lens only has one ring. Not a big problem for me because of the type of stuff I will do with this camera is not going to be massively manual anyway. And As a result, I don't really need 3 rings, but some people I know will have an issue with that. They'll be so used to using 3 rings that they might have a problem with this one only being zoom and focus, and when it's focus, it's not particularly good anyway. Power up when opened. Now, some people love this, that the camera powers up as soon as you open the door, and it is great because it makes the startup really quick, as I mentioned earlier in the good points. I almost wish there was maybe not a way of turning it off permanently, but just having something you can hold down or something, so that, you know, when you open it, you don't power it up if you don't want to. If you just, because what annoys me for some reason, and it isn't a big deal, because I can pop the battery out, I can just turn it on and turn it off again. But for some reason, it bugs me that when I take the card out, I have to turn the camera on. And it's a silly thing. It shouldn't bother me at all, but it does. It's just one of those little things that niggles at me, and that's what I'm talking about here, mostly niggles with this camera. Because overall, it's a great camera, and there you go. I just wanted to list some of the things that I see as being particularly strong, and some of the things that are a little bit more annoyances than anything else. Hopefully that's useful if you're looking to buy this camera. If you like the video, then please do share it, or put a comment below if you've got any questions, or if you'd like some footage from the camera, whatever, usual sort of stuff. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon. Now, Miles, look at the lens. Look at the lens there. So don't look at that screen. Don't look at that screen, because that's just going to distract you. Look at the lens there. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Tell me one bad thing about this camera. One thing that you think is just rubbish that people will need to know because it's rubbish.
Because the red thing on the head.
Ah, the red. Yeah, the red thing. He's talking about the peaking. Whenever you're looking at the screen, just see a load of red on your skin and stuff. Peaking. So right, you don't like the peaking. What about a good thing about the camera?
About the colour it's black.
Oh, you like the colour of it? Yeah. Ah, good, good. Yes, I like the colour. I like my tech to be just plain sort of matte black. Good choices. Thank you very much. Appreciate the interview. Good work. Carry on playing with your cars, I think. Cars.